state capture inquiry. Let's cross to our reporter Mzwandile Mbeje, who's standing by for us at the inquiry. Mzwandile, so Mr. Maseko has wrapped up his testimony, lots of explosions that he let go. Just tell us about those.
Thank you very much, Nombu. Indeed, lots to say there from the former head of GCIS, telling us about how he eventually left the public service, which he had served for about 17 years. But perhaps before I go into those details, Nombu, with me is the legal journalist, Karen Mon, who's been here throughout monitoring the proceedings. And she has just spoken to Mr. Maseko as he was walking out. Welcome, Karen. You've just said a word or two to Mr. Maseko. What are his impressions about this whole thing?
Well, Themba Maseko, as you rightly pointed out, losing his job essentially in the face of his refusal to channel 600 million rand in advertising from the state to Gupta media companies, saying that even though, standing up against this alleged state capture had come at great personal cost for him, he still believed he'd done the right thing, and that he was hoping that through this process, South Africans would get real and profound insight into how state capture had actually occurred. But as you pointed out, a loyal public service without a single blemish on his record, effectively removed from a position that he had excelled in for many years because he didn't, on his version, want to be part of a project of state capture.
If you look at the evidence of Mr. Maseko compared to other people, so who would you say really has given the picture of what this commission is seeking to achieve?
I think Mr. Maseko's evidence is perhaps the most problematic of all the witness evidence that for former President Jacob Zuma, because essentially what Mr. Maseko did was he places Mr. Zuma very much within the context of allegedly serving the will of the Gupta family. How do we know this? He's given evidence that essentially prior to a 2010 meeting with RJ Gupta, in which Mr. Gupta allegedly tried to compel him to channel the 600 million rand towards Gupta companies, the former president in fact phoned him and told him in Zulu that he needed to help the Guptas. He said, of course, he didn't get really any detail from the former president as to what exactly that would mean. But essentially, RJ Gupta subsequently in that meeting telling him that if ministers and government departments did not want to hand over their state advertising money to GCIS so that it could be specifically channeled back to the Gupta's companies, he would speak to Zuma and Zuma would sort out those ministers. This is damning evidence, and if it's in any way true or there's any truth to it, it certainly paints a picture of a president who was not leading the country, but rather being led by the wishes, commercially driven wishes, of a particular family.
He mentioned the late minister, Collins Chabane. In terms of evidence, obviously he will not be here to say anything for himself. So is that not perhaps problematic in terms of the arguments? Should he be called for cross-examination?
This was in relation to Mr. Maseko's removal from GCIS and Collins Chabane on his version saying to him, look, I don't agree with this, but President Zuma has told me that you must be removed and potentially redeployed elsewhere. I think that you're right. I think when cross-examination does occur that the lawyers for the Guptas, who we know will seek to cross-examine Mr. Maseko, will make a point of that. But we might see the inquiry trying to use other extraneous evidence to back that up. However, at this point, you are correct, it is hearsay, and I think the Commission may well have to make a finding, given that Mr. Chabane is deceased, that they might not necessarily have evidential backing for that particular aspect of his evidence.
Thank you very much, Karen. There was Karen Mon there, the legal journalist, who's been here throughout monitoring the proceedings and really getting to understand what this state capture is about. The session has adjourned, Nombu. We expect the proceedings to resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. The acting chief of GCIS, Pumla Williams, will be the one taking the stand. So it would be very interesting to hear the operations there, if there were any instructions perhaps that are untoward, if she received any of those, given what Mr. Maseko has said here.
All right, Mzwandile, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your report.